Hello everyone. I am Alice of KHR Arts and Cloud Orchid Publishing, and today I wanted to talk about how exactly to go about being a panelist at conventions. This is specifically through the lens of being an author at a convention, although it can be applied in other aspects, but it's definitely more geared toward the author audience. We're gonna dive right in. I personally have been doing conventions now since 2018 as a vendor and an author. I've been doing conventions since 2006. I was that dorky kid that did ASEN and a lot of the geeky conventions, but I was there mostly just to have fun and prance around and cosplay, whereas in 2018 is when I started to get really serious, and that's also when I had my first novel published, Love of the Sea, yay! And so I started going to conventions to be able to sell my books. And once I started getting comfortable working as a vendor at these conventions, I started adding being a panelist into the mix. Now, I do know that I do have some author friends who exclusively go to conventions as a panelist. They don't go and sell their books directly as vendors at the conventions. For some people, it's too much to do both, to be a panelist and to sell their books in a vendor capacity, meaning you have your own table and you sit in the vendor hall and blah, 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 and all that. I talk about all of that in my other video, how to be a vendor at conventions, and it's super in-depth because honestly, y'all, it is a ton of hard work. It's a lot of fun, but it is a ton of hard work. And if you're not prepared, it's very overwhelming. And even when you are prepared, it's very overwhelming. So I completely understand my fellow authors who are like, you know what? That's just too much for me. I'm just going to do panels and that's it. And even then, being a panelist is a big job. It's a big part of the conventions, and that takes work too. Going into convention panels, definitely make sure that you're prepared. Don't just show up and be like, I'm just going to talk about a thing, because chances are you're going to be talked over. You're not going to necessarily know what you want to say. Your thoughts are not going to be organized, and it's just going to make you nervous and overwhelmed. One of the big things, number one, is I detail in my other video how exactly to sign up for conventions, sign up for panels, blah, 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 all that good stuff. So if you want to hear about that, do click over to that video. The link is in the description, and I can give you all the nitty-gritty details on all those how-tos. But we are going to be strictly talking about, you've already signed up, you already have your badge, you already have your panels, all that. All that's already been taken care of. When you sign up as a panelist, you are typically going to receive an email from the convention staff, and it's going to detail what panels you're going to speak on, what days and what times those panels are at, and where they are located in the convention. Those are super important to know. So first of all, when you get that information, you want to do yourself a big favor, and I talk about this kind of stuff in my other video, Marketing Milestones, which is also in the description, is make sure you make a post about it. Make sure that you post, hey, I am going to be at blah, blah, blah convention, and I'm going to be speaking on blah, blah, blah panels on these days at these times, and just put all the details. I personally have a cute little graphic where I put all that information in the graphic. That way I don't have to take up the actual text of my post, especially with Twitter having limited characters, and plus TLDR. It's just a lot easier for people to be able to save a picture onto their phone and to have all the information right there. So that's what I do whenever I make an announcement of I'm going to be at these panels and la la la. It's very helpful, and it also keeps it top of mind for people so that they know when they go to the convention to make sure that they look at the programming and make time for your panels. That's another big part of it, is making sure that people show up to your panel. Is that, yes, at conventions, people who are attending the convention will typically just wander to different panels. They'll look over the programming beforehand and be like, oh, that looks interesting, or blah, blah, blah. But you're going to really help beef up attendance at your panels if you post about it beforehand. That way people know to look for you and know to look for that panel. So do yourself that favor and make sure that you are marketing that you're a panelist ahead of time. Now, the next step is you need to prepare for those panels. And I know that sounds kind of weird. Well, I'm just there to talk about stuff that I know. Yes and no. So it all depends on the panels that you've signed up for. Obviously, if it's a panel where you just sit there and you talk about how awesome your writing is and what inspires you and blah, 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 you probably don't really have to do a lot of preparation for that. But there are many panels where there are panels that are educational, that cover very specific aspects of the industry, genre, whatever. So for example, one of the panels that I've done in the past is talking about the historical references that go into writing fantasy stories. And that is a thing that I am huge on, y'all, is the fact that a lot of fantasy is based on real cultural and historical information. And I was on a panel about that. And even though I am very knowledgeable about that topic, I still made sure that I was prepared going into that panel so that I wasn't just sitting there like, duh. Because you'd be surprised, especially if it's one of your first panel experiences. It can be a little bit overwhelming sitting, especially if it's on a stage. Some of them, you're like on a whole stage and everything, and there's the whole crowd of people staring up at you. It can be pretty overwhelming. You can kind of lose your cool and blank out. It happens. Having a few notes at the ready, even if it's just on your phone, just to look at right before you go into the panel, can really help just keep those bullet points fresh in your mind that you want to make sure that you talk about. Sometimes you have to do a little bit of research, whether it's a topic that you're very knowledgeable about, or maybe it's a topic that you kind of know, but you want to make sure that you beef up your expertise so that you don't look silly in front of the audience. Whatever you got to do, make sure that you know what you want to talk about, and make sure you know what you're talking about ahead of time when you're doing the panels. The next part is what you want to bring to the panel. So unless the convention has specific instructions about how panelists are supposed to set up for the panel, and some of them do have specific instructions, be sure to follow whatever those are. For example, at the convention that I recently did, WindyCon, they were very big on conservation. So they didn't want to have to print a little paper placard for every person for every panel. What that means is that if I have 4 panels, which I had multiple panels, but if I have 4 panels, they don't want to print out 4 placards with my name on it. They wanted to print one, and I was responsible for keeping my placard with me and bringing it with to each panel that I did. If I lost it or whatever, they could print out another one for me, but they really wanted to make sure that people were hanging onto their placards and reusing them so that they could use less paper. So that's one of the special instructions that you might be asked to do. So make sure that you pay attention to those specific instructions. A good thing to do at panels, if it's appropriate, make sure that the topic makes it appropriate. You don't want to look like an overconfident jack. If it makes sense for the panel topic, a really great thing to do is to bring your book. Have one of your little book stands, bring one of your books just so that you can put it next to your placard and have it displayed there. I've done that in the past for some things that are very specific to, yes, this has 100% to do with what I'm talking about. One of those panels that I was on was specifically about self-publishing. And so I brought my book Geisha Hands with me to that panel because I wanted to specifically talk about why I self-published that book as opposed to traditionally publishing it, and I wanted to physically show the audience the actual formatting inside the book, because that's one of the number one reasons why I self-published that book, is that traditional publishers don't want to deal with all of that special formatting. So that made sense for that panel for me to bring that book because it was a visual aid. I wasn't just pimping out, buy my book, and being that person, which, depending on the panel, sometimes it's okay to do that, but like 75% of the time, it's really not okay to do that. And it's kind of cheesy and rude, so don't do that. But if it's an important visual aid, totally have your book there. It will help with visualizing whatever it is you're talking about, as well as it is a subtle nod to, oh, by the way, I wrote this by my book, sort of thing. The second thing that you want to make sure that you bring to your panel is business cards. This is a big one that so many people forget, and it is like the easiest thing to forget, especially if you're also working as a vendor, to grab some of your business cards and take them with you to your panel, because usually you're running around scrambled doing 8 million things if you're also working as a vendor. So I've been there, I've forgotten stuff, it happens. But if you can be organized and on the ball, absolutely bring business cards to the panel, because after the panel is over, there will be this period of time, it's usually about 5 to 10 minutes between panels, so that they have the switch over where the people who are in that panel are leaving and the people that are going to be in the next panel are coming in. People will come up to you and want to talk to you about the stuff that you talked about on the panel, and it's really great to be able to hand them a business card. This is also usually when it's much smarter to plug the buy my book sort of thing, where you can tell them about your book that has to do with the panel. Make sure that you've got your business cards on hand so that you can pass them out after the panel. Number 3, if you're also vending at the event, absolutely 100% at the end of the panel, make sure that you plug that you are vending in the vendor hall. This is different from having your book out and be like, buy my book. It's making sure that people know to also look for you in the vendor hall. So when everybody's wrapping up and kind of saying their goodbyes at the end of the panel, just as your closing statement, be like, and you can also find me in the vendor hall. Then give a little at slot C62 or wherever it is, or oh, it's by the stand with the giant crocodile, whatever little visual thing to be able to give them to know where you are in the vendor hall. That isn't okay to do, as long as you make it part of your goodbye speech and you keep it short and sweet. Make it just very like, oh, by the way. The last thing that you want to bring to the panel is any sort of visual aid or notes, or if you have to plug in and present something on your computer, just make sure that you bring whatever materials it is that you need in order to properly present at the panel. And if you do have to do something that involves some sort of technology, plugging into your computer, whatever, make sure it works beforehand. Make sure you test it out and make sure it works beforehand, and most importantly, have a backup plan. I can't tell you how many times technology has decided it doesn't want to work. It doesn't want to work with whatever the tech setup is that the convention has provided. Sound feels like not working today, whatever. Make sure you have a backup plan so that the presentation, the show, can still go on. A big thing that I noticed that people have done as a backup in case, because this is a common thing with conventions, that suddenly the sound will just decide to not work and it'll go rogue. That's one of the most common things with panels that'll happen, is they will bring a portable speaker, whether it's Bluetooth or it plugs directly into their computer, whatever. It's going to be so helpful if you just bring a little speaker with you. It'll save you a lot of trouble in that backup plan. I can honestly tell you that is probably one of the biggest plan Bs to make sure that you bring to your panel. Make sure that your technology works, that your presentation, everything is solid, everything is where it's supposed to be, showing whatever it's supposed to show. In addition to that, make sure that if you are presenting, be careful of what you have open on your computer. Make sure you're not showing anybody things that they shouldn't be seeing or things you don't want them to see. Make sure that you close out of stuff and your desktop picture isn't inappropriate. Be mindful of that before you plug in your computer to be on the big projector screen, just to save you a little embarrassment and just to make sure that you're prepared and that everything is sorted out. All of that preparation, the panel itself. Some tips on how you want to make sure that you actually behave at the panel is going to be dictated by the panel topic and by the panel moderator. Panels are typically about 4 to 6 people, depending on how big the convention is and depending on how big the panel is. In those panels, one person will be assigned as the panel moderator. What the panel moderator does is they make sure everyone stays on topic. They make sure that if there are predestined questions created for the panel, they make sure that those questions are actually asked at the panel. They make sure that nobody is talking over anybody else. Make sure that everyone has a fair chance to speak. And then at the end of the panel, they're typically the ones that help facilitate the question and answer portion with the audience. That is their role. Make sure that you are not forcing the moderator to work harder than they have to. Make sure you're also moderating yourself. Make sure to be aware of if you are talking over anybody. Ask yourself, how long have I been talking for? Ask yourself, how many times have I answered a question versus how many questions has everybody else had a chance to answer? And if you start talking at the same time as somebody else to answer something, ask yourself, do I really need to be talking right now, or should I let this person have a turn? This is a thing that you kind of have to feel out. It's a case-by-case scenario. Because there have been panels where I've been very excited about the topic and I just have all the things I want to share with everyone, and oh my god. And I had to reel myself back in because I realized, oh my god, I am talking a lot. I am talking over other people. I need to give other people a turn. I need to calm down. And then conversely, I have also unfortunately been on panels where there have been people who have just absolutely monopolized the panel and not really given other people a chance to speak, and then you end up actually having to forcibly talk over that person to kind of get them to shut up so that other people can have a chance to speak. For example, there's a difference between I'm very excited about this topic. Typically, your fellow panelists will understand that because that's why we're all there. We're all excited to talk about the thing. Some are more excited than others. That's okay. And then there's those panelists who just love to hear themselves talk. It's a totally different vibe. It's cringe. And the other panelists are just kind of sitting there like, you done yet, bro? Did you really need to answer that question? Are you really adding anything to the conversation? And I'm sure it's hard for the audience to watch that too. I've been there and those panels suck, and you have to make sure that you have a really good moderator, and it can go south real fast. The best way to handle that is to just literally talk over the person. And if you're the moderator, to literally tell them to shut up. I have literally been at a panel where the moderator had to tell somebody to literally shut up and let others have a turn. Don't be afraid to do that if you're the moderator. Tell somebody to shut up if you really have to, if they're being that person. It happens. But if somebody's just really excited about it, usually if you give them a subtle nudge, they'll realize they're just off to the races and they'll reel it back in. Treat everything case by case. Make sure that you know the vibe of what's going on. Don't punish someone for being excited. All that good stuff. We're all here to have fun. Make sure that the panel is fun too. Another good thing to remember about panel conduct is handling the microphone. This is something that a lot of us don't really think about when we're doing panels and we're in the thick of it and stuff, but especially nowadays with COVID and just health and safety and all of that. Some big things that seem Captain Obvious, but they're those things in the moment you don't really think about, is when handling the microphone. Make sure that the microphone is far enough away from your mouth that you're not like spitting all over the microphone, and God forbid, do not put your mouth on the microphone because that's just disgusting. Because not only is everyone in that panel using that microphone, but everyone who is going to be having a panel in that room, whether it's a one-day convention or a whole weekend convention, that many people are going to be using that microphone. Do everybody a favor and let's all keep our germs and our spit to ourselves. Make sure there is enough space between your mouth and the microphone. A lot of people at the last convention that I was at during panels kept their masks on even while using the microphone, and everybody was able to hear them just fine. Made everybody feel a lot more comfortable, and also made it so that you didn't really have to worry about the whole spit factor on the microphone. Another thing to remember is, again, with the etiquette of making sure that other people get a chance to talk, if you have a microphone that everybody is holding and passing rather than microphones that are stationed on the table, so different setups, but if you have I'm passing the singular microphone between the panelists, try to make sure that when you have the microphone, keep in mind who really hasn't had a chance to talk yet. And if they kind of indicate at a certain point that they have something to say, have the sense to pass them the microphone. Don't just hand it off to the person next to you. Be aware of all of the panelists on the panel with you, and make sure that microphone gets passed around judiciously so that everyone has a chance. Just kind of keep in mind people's body language, people's facial expressions. If they're kind of leaning towards you like, oh, I have something I want to say, oh, be aware of that so that you can make sure everyone is having a chance to contribute. Make sure you're not invading anybody's personal space. It's a thing that sounds Captain Obvious, but when we're in it, we don't always think about it. People have been a little more mindful of personal space, again, because of the pandemic and all that, but still, make sure, because a lot of times you're kind of in close quarters with panels, especially if you have a panel of 6 people. That's a lot of people at one table. And some panels don't have the huge long tables like they have at the fancy panels at Comic-Con. Some of them are smaller and you're kind of packed in there a little bit. So just be mindful of how much space you're taking up at the table, and just make sure you're not making anybody uncomfortable. If you notice you've got some wingalings going on, you got your elbows out on the table taking up more space, or if you're, God forbid, man-spreading under the table or whatever, just be mindful that you're not really like encroaching on your neighbor's space and touching them and leaning on them and making them uncomfortable. So just be aware of your bubble, be aware of your neighbor's bubbles, all that good stuff, so that everybody can have a comfortable time at the panel. Last but not least, question and answer. Some panels, there will be time for questions and answers with the audience. When doing the Q&A, make sure to pay attention to all of the questions that are asked, but be prepared to not answer them. Again, make sure that your fellow panelists have the opportunity to all speak and to have opportunities to answer questions. But at the same time, make sure that you are prepared and listen to those questions just in case you feel that you, 1, want to answer and can answer the question, and 2, if everybody's kind of like, I don't know how to answer that, do you know how to answer that? Just so that you're on your game and you can immediately answer if need be, but also be aware, again, of your fellow panelists, their body language, their facial expressions for who might have the best answer, who's the most eager to answer, all of that. So just make sure that you're on the ball, because Q&A time is usually the wrap up. There's a very limited amount of time. People are going to want to have as many questions answered as possible. So just make sure that you're able to get through it, keep it moving, be prepared to answer those questions, but give everybody a chance to speak. And again, like I had said, when the panel's wrapping up, people will come up to you and talk to you. That's a great time to exchange business cards, to remind people that you're selling your books in the vendor hall, where they can get your books online, all that good stuff. Just those nice little wrap-up things, but at the same time, again, being aware of what's going on around you. The next group of panelists is going to be coming in at that point, so make sure that you're keeping it short and sweet with the people after the panel, and remember, you can always take the conversation somewhere else. So if you want to continue that conversation with somebody or with a group of somebody's, you can always leave the panel room and go in the hallway, go in the lobby, go to your booth in the vendor hall. You can always just change the location and continue the conversation. Make sure that you are being courteous to the next group of panelists that are coming into the room to have their own panel, because you want to make sure that previous group is courteous to you so that you can use the entire amount of time for your panel, so make sure they have the same thing. Keeping all these things in mind when working as a panelist at conventions, it can be overwhelming and it can be a lot, but again, it's something that the more you do it, the more practice you have, the easier it's going to get, the more you're going to get used to those quick little spiels and catchphrases, and honestly, a lot of the questions end up repeating too, especially if you do a lot of the same topics at convention panels. You're going to hear a lot of the same questions. You'll be better prepared to answer them. So I hope this has been helpful, y'all. I want to thank y'all so much for tuning in. Please be sure to give this video a like, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do give it a subscribe. Alrighty, y'all, I will see you later. Thank y'all so much. Bye-bye.